5 years after my wife Dana got a job at a company I barely knew anything about, I walked through its front doors as the new CEO. I had imagined that moment would feel like a victory. Instead, it felt like walking into a room where everyone already knew a secret except me. My name is Daniel, and when I accepted the CEO position, I believed the worst part of our family's story was already behind us. I was wrong. The first morning, I entered the executive office and found an old file sitting on my desk. My name was written across the cover in black ink. I opened it expecting routine business documents. Instead, I found a photograph taken 5 years earlier. Dana was standing beside Victor Hale, Richard, and Edward Mason. But there was another person in the photograph, partially hidden behind them. I recognized him immediately. It was someone who had been close to my family for years. My hands became cold as I turned the page. Under the photograph was a sentence: "Daniel still doesn't know the full truth." I called my executive assistant and asked who had placed the file there. Nobody knew. I asked for the company's old records concerning Victor. Dana, Richard, and Edward. My assistant warned me that many files from that period had been archived. I told her to bring me everything legally available. That afternoon, I discovered that Dana's original hiring file was not complete. Several pages were missing. The same thing had happened with the financial investigation involving my company. Someone had removed specific documents from 2 separate files. That couldn't be a coincidence. I called Dana and asked her to meet me at the office. When she arrived, I showed her the photograph. She stared at it for several seconds and then covered her face with her hands. I asked her who the 4th person was. She finally gave me a name. It was someone I had trusted more than almost anyone. Then she said something that changed my understanding of everything. "Daniel, I didn't get that job because Victor wanted to help me. I got it because someone needed me inside the company." I asked who had arranged it. Dana looked at me and said, "The person who arranged it knew you better than anyone. For 5 years, I had believed I was investigating a corporate mystery. Now, I realized the mystery had started much closer to home. The moment Dana told me that someone who knew me personally had arranged her job, I felt as though the floor beneath me had shifted. I asked her to tell me everything she had kept hidden. She said she would, but only if I promised not to make any sudden decisions. I agreed. We sat in my office with the door closed, and Dana began explaining what had happened 5 years earlier. She said that before she ever applied for the position, someone had contacted her privately. That person knew about my business problems and knew that I was close to losing my company. They offered Dana an opportunity at the company and told her that if she accepted, she could quietly help uncover what had happened to my business. I asked why they couldn't simply tell me. Dana said because they believed I would refuse to cooperate if I knew the investigation involved people inside the company. Then she told me the name of the person who had approached her. It was the person from the photograph, someone I had trusted for years, someone who had attended family gatherings and sat at our dinner table. I couldn't understand why that person would involve Dana without telling me. Dana explained that he had discovered evidence that Richard was manipulating my business records. He also suspected that Edward was helping hide the transactions inside the company. But there was another problem. The person who had arranged Dana's job believed someone at the highest level of the company was protecting them. That was why Dana had been placed inside the organization. She wasn't there simply to work. She was there to observe. I asked her whether she had ever intended to betray me. She immediately said no. She had believed she was protecting our family. But the investigation had become complicated, and Victor had eventually taken control of it. Dana showed me an old notebook she had kept hidden for years. It contained dates, names, meetings, and short notes about people she had spoken to. I turned through the pages until I reached an entry dated 2 weeks before she started her job. It said, "They know about Daniel's business. They know about the contract. Someone is trying to make him look responsible." I asked what contract she meant. Dana said it was the contract that had caused my company to lose nearly everything. I remembered that contract clearly. Richard had told me the client had cancelled because of a misunderstanding. But Dana now revealed that the cancellation had been deliberately engineered. Someone had changed the documents before they reached the client. I asked who had done it. She said she didn't know at first. Then she turned to the final page of the notebook. A name was written there. It wasn't Richard. It wasn't Edward. It was the name of a person who had been sitting in the company's board meetings for years, and that person had one reason for wanting my business to fail. I stared at the name for several seconds before I could speak. The person Dana had written down wasn't just another executive. He had been one of the company's most respected leaders. His name was Samuel Grant. I remembered seeing him at company events. After becoming CEO, he had always been polite to me and had congratulated me on my appointment. Now I wondered whether every smile had been hiding something. I asked Dana why she had never told me his name. She said because she had never been certain. Victor had suspected Samuel, but they needed proof. I asked whether Victor had left anything behind. Dana said yes. She had received a message from him shortly before he retired. He told her that if the truth ever came out, she should look for a locked archive in the old executive records room. As CEO, I now had access to that room. I went there with my attorney. We found several boxes marked with dates from 5 years earlier. One contained records from the investigation into my company. Another contained correspondence between Samuel and Richard. The emails were carefully written, but their meaning was clear. Samuel had been pressuring Richard to keep certain transactions hidden. In one message, Samuel wrote that if my business failed, the company could acquire it at a fraction of its real value. I felt sick reading it. My company hadn't simply been targeted by a dishonest partner. It had been targeted because someone wanted to profit from its collapse. But there was still a question I couldn't answer. Why had Dana's job been necessary? My attorney found the answer in another document. The company had needed someone outside the executive circle to collect information without attracting suspicion. Dana had been chosen because she was connected to me, but had no official relationship with the people under investigation. Her hiring had been disguised as a normal recruitment decision. The salary and position were real. The secret assignment was not. I realized that Dana had been living 2 lives for 5 years. She was my wife at home and an unwilling witness to a corporate investigation at work. Then I found something that changed everything. A handwritten note from Victor said that Samuel had discovered the investigation and had started destroying evidence. Victor had managed to save copies, but he feared someone would eventually find them. That's why he had hidden the records outside the company. I asked my attorney whether the evidence was enough. He said it could be, but we needed to verify every document. Before we could do that, Samuel requested a private meeting with me. He walked into my office calmly, closed the door and said, "Daniel, I think you have been asking questions about things that happened before you became CEO." I asked him how he knew. He smiled and said, "Because I was there." Then he placed a folder on my desk. "Before you decide what to believe," he said, "you should know what your wife hasn't told you." I didn't open Samuel's folder immediately. I asked him what he meant by saying Dana hadn't told me everything. He said there was another side to the story. According to Samuel, Dana had agreed to work with Victor because she believed my business was in danger, but she hadn't told me that she had also signed a confidentiality agreement. That agreement prevented her from revealing certain company information. Asked whether she had signed it willingly. Samuel said yes. I didn't know what to believe. When he left, I called Dana and asked about the agreement. She admitted it existed. She said she had been afraid that breaking it would expose our family to legal problems. Told her that I understood her fear. But every missing piece made it harder for me to know whom to trust. Then I opened Samuel's folder. Inside were documents suggesting that Victor had known more than he had admitted. There were also records showing that the investigation had started before Dana ever joined the company. I realized that Victor had approached Dana because he needed someone who could connect the corporate records to my business. But there was a deeper reason. Samuel had been trying to acquire my company through intermediaries. Richard was helping him from the inside. Edward was helping manipulate company records. Victor discovered the plan and tried to stop it. Dana became part of the investigation because she was close to me and could help identify which records were genuine. The truth was beginning to form. But one question still bothered me. Why had Samuel given me the folder? My attorney examined it and discovered that some of the documents had been altered. Samuel was trying to create doubt around Victor and Dana. He wanted me to believe the entire investigation had been manipulated. We confronted Samuel with the records we had independently verified. His confidence disappeared. Then he made a statement I wasn't expecting. He said Richard had not been the mastermind. Richard had only been paid to follow instructions. The person giving those instructions was Samuel himself. That admission wasn't enough for a legal case by itself, but combined with the documents, it became important. We handed everything to the proper authorities. The investigation expanded. Several former employees were interviewed, and financial records were reviewed. Meanwhile, Dana and I finally had the conversation we had avoided for years. She told me that she had never stopped loving me. She said every secret had started with one decision she believed would protect our family. But each secret created another one. I told her I couldn't erase 5 years of pain, but I could understand why she had been afraid. Then she gave me the final piece of information she had been hiding. She said Victor had once told her that Samuel wasn't the only person involved. There had been someone above him, someone who had approved the plan. When Dana told me someone had been above Samuel, I realized the mystery was still deeper than I had imagined. I asked whether she knew the person's name. She said Victor had never told her directly. He had only called that person the final decision maker. My attorney reviewed every document we had. We discovered that Samuel had reported to a board committee, but one particular board member had approved several unusual transactions. His name was Charles Bennett, the company's former chairman. Charles had retired shortly after Dana joined the company. He had always been presented as a respected businessman. But the records showed something different. Several companies connected to him had benefited when businesses like mine were forced into difficult financial positions. We traced payments through legitimate-looking consulting firms and discovered that some of the money eventually reached accounts connected to people who had worked with Richard. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. But there was one final mystery. Why had Charles wanted my company specifically? The answer came from an old acquisition proposal. My company owned a valuable contract and several properties that the company wanted to acquire. If my business failed, those assets could be purchased cheaply. Richard had been promised a position in the new structure. Samuel would receive financial benefits. Edward would protect the paperwork. Charles would control the larger deal. And Dana's job had accidentally placed her in the middle of the entire plan. Then we discovered something even more personal. 5 years earlier, Charles had met with someone from my family before Dana accepted the job. I asked Dana whether she knew about that meeting. She said no. I asked Millie and Robert Dolan if they remembered anything unusual from that period. Robert remembered that someone had visited our home while I was away on a business trip. He had been told it was a friend of Mom's. Robert had never thought about it again. But when he described the man, Dana recognized him. It was one of Charles's associates. Suddenly I understood why the original note had said that I must never know why Dana was hired. They didn't want me to discover that people had been studying my business and my family before the job offer was even made. We gathered everything and gave it to investigators. Charles was eventually questioned. At first, he denied everything. Then financial records began contradicting his statements. Samuel's position became impossible to defend. Richard cooperated after realizing that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Edward provided records that helped establish how the documents had been altered. Slowly, the entire scheme came into view. But one question remained. What had happened to Victor? We hadn't heard from him in years. Then, unexpectedly, my attorney received a letter from him. The letter contained an apology and one final confession. Victor admitted that he had known from the beginning that Dana's job was dangerous, but he believed it was the only way to protect me without putting me directly in the line of fire. He also revealed that he had kept one final document hidden for years. That document contained the original agreement that started everything. The original agreement was more important than anything we had found before. It showed that the plan to acquire my company had been discussed before my business ever began struggling. The people involved had expected the financial pressure to force me into selling. Richard's role was to weaken the business from within. Samuel's role was to coordinate the corporate side. Edward was responsible for altering records. Charles was supposed to approve the final acquisition. And Dana had been brought into the company because Victor needed someone he believed would protect me rather than betray me. I finally understood why Dana had accepted the job. She had been trying to save our family, without knowing how complicated the situation would become. The documents also proved that the money that had saved my business years earlier had been deliberately arranged by Victor. He had kept the company from taking control of my assets while secretly gathering evidence. That was why Dana had received financial help before her first paycheck. It had never been a normal employment benefit. It had been part of a larger effort to keep my company alive. I was angry that so many people had made decisions about my life without telling me. But I also realized that their actions had prevented something much worse. We submitted the final documents through the proper legal channels. Investigators confirmed that several records had been falsified and that financial arrangements had been hidden through intermediary companies. The people responsible faced the consequences of their actions through the legal system. I never wanted to destroy anyone personally. I wanted the truth established. Once the investigation was complete, the company began repairing its internal controls. I ordered a complete review of old records and changed the procedures that had allowed executives to hide transactions. Some people questioned why I was going so far. I told them I knew what happened when a company trusted the wrong people. I also made sure Dinah was never blamed publicly for being involved in the investigation. She had acted under pressure, but she had ultimately helped protect our family. One evening, after everything had finally settled, Dana and I sat together and talked about the 5 years that had changed us. She apologized again. This time I told her I didn't want another apology. I wanted us to start living without secrets. She agreed. We couldn't change the past, but we could stop allowing it to control our future. Then my attorney called. He said there was one last document that hadn't been reviewed. It was a private note written by Charles shortly before the acquisition plan began. The note contained a sentence that shocked me because it revealed why I had been chosen. Charles hadn't targeted my company because of its money alone. He had targeted me because he believed I would eventually become something far more valuable to him than a business owner. He believed I would one day have a position inside the company itself. When I read Charles's final note, I finally understood the full story. He had predicted that the company would eventually need new leadership. He believed that if my business collapsed, I would either sell my assets or accept a position inside the company. Either way, he expected to control the outcome. What he never expected was that I would survive, rebuild my business, and eventually become the CEO on my own terms. The irony was almost unbelievable. The plan designed to destroy my future had eventually led me straight into the office where I could uncover the entire truth. I gathered Dana, Millie, and Robert Dolan and told them that the mystery was finally over. There were no more hidden names, no more missing documents, and no more unanswered questions. Dana cried when she realized that she could finally stop carrying the secret. Robert was angry that so many people had manipulated our family, but he also understood why his mother had made the choices she did. Millie simply held her mother's hand and told her that the family was still together. For me, that was the greatest victory. Not the CEO position, not the business, not seeing the people responsible lose their influence. My real victory was knowing that the people I loved were safe and that my name had been cleared. I also learned that revenge doesn't always mean destroying the person who hurt you. Sometimes revenge is surviving what they planned for you. Sometimes it is rebuilding your life so completely that their plan becomes irrelevant. Charles had wanted me to lose everything. Instead, I rebuilt. Richard wanted my company to fail. Instead, it survived. Samuel believed he could control the outcome. Instead, the truth came out. And Dana, the woman whose job had started this entire mystery, became the person who helped uncover the truth that had been hidden from me for 5 years. Years later, people would ask me how I became CEO of the company that had once been connected to the darkest period of my life. I would tell them that I never planned it. Life simply brought me back to the place where the story had begun. The difference was that the second time I walked through those doors, I wasn't the man they thought they could manipulate. I was the man who knew the truth. And when I finally sat behind the CEO's desk, I looked at the old photograph one last time. 5 years earlier, I had been the man everyone wanted to keep in the dark. Now I was the person with access to every record, every decision, and every piece of evidence. I didn't need to guess anymore. I didn't need to wonder what Dana had hidden or who had been behind the plan. I knew, and more importantly, my family knew. The secret that had controlled our lives for 5 years was finally gone. I closed the file, placed it in the company archive, and walked out of the office with Dana beside me. For the first time since she accepted that job at 41, there was nothing left between us that needed to be uncovered. If you like this video, response us by comment. Tell your places where you are looking from it. Make me happy to see people from different places. And don't forget to subscribe channel for more videos.